So, I came across another story, and this one is less about something obvious happening and more about slowly realizing that something is completely wrong in a way you can't easily explain. It's about a guy who started working night shifts at a small warehouse on the edge of the city. The job itself was simple. He was responsible for monitoring cameras, checking deliveries, and making sure everything stayed locked and secure until morning. It paid well enough, and since he preferred being alone, it actually felt like a perfect fit. The first few nights were uneventful. The warehouse was quiet, the cameras showed nothing unusual, and the only sounds were the occasional hum of machines or distant traffic outside. He would sit in the small office, watching the monitors, occasionally doing rounds through the building just to stay awake. The layout of the place was simple. A long central corridor, storage rooms on both sides, a loading dock at the far end, and the office near the entrance. Everything was easy to navigate, and after a few nights, he knew the entire place by memory. But after about a week, he started noticing something strange about the cameras. At first, it was subtle. One of the cameras at the end of the corridor would sometimes flicker, not completely turn off, just distort for a second before returning to normal. He assumed it was just a technical issue. Old building, old equipment, nothing surprising, but then he noticed that the flicker didn't happen randomly. It always happened when he looked directly at that camera feed. If he was focused on another screen, nothing happened. But the moment his attention shifted to that specific camera, the image would glitch slightly, just enough to feel intentional. He tried to ignore it, but once he noticed it, he couldn't unsee it. A couple of nights later, things escalated. He was doing his usual round through the warehouse when he felt something off. Not a sound, not a movement, just a feeling that something wasn't right. He checked all the doors, all the locks. Everything was exactly as it should be. When he got back to the office, he looked at the monitors, and that's when he saw it. One of the cameras showed the corridor, and at the far end of it, there was something standing there. It wasn't clear enough to make out details. Just a shape. Tall, still, and slightly darker than everything around it. He froze. He stared at the screen, trying to figure out what he was seeing. His first thought was that it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from something outside. But then the figure moved, not walking, just slightly shifting, like it was adjusting its position. That's when he got up. He told himself he had to check it. It could be an intruder, someone breaking in, something real that needed to be dealt with. He grabbed a flashlight and walked into the corridor. Everything was empty. No one there. No sound. No sign that anyone had been there at all. He walked all the way to the end of the corridor, checking every corner, every room along the way. Nothing. When he came back to the office, he checked the cameras again. The corridor was empty. At that point, he convinced himself it had to be a glitch. Maybe the camera had picked up a reflection or something from earlier, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Over the next few nights, the same thing kept happening. The figure would appear on the camera, always in the same place, always at the far end of the corridor, and every time he went to check, it was gone. He started avoiding that camera feed. He would focus on the others, pretending like nothing was wrong. But sometimes, without meaning to, his eyes would drift back to it. And every time they did, the image would flicker, like it knew he was looking. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. One night, instead of going to check immediately, he decided to just watch. The figure appeared again. Same place, same shape. He sat there staring at the screen, forcing himself not to look away. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The figure didn't move. It just stood there. Then, slowly, something changed. The shape became clearer, not detailed enough to see a face, but enough to understand that it wasn't just a shadow. It had a form, arms, a head, standing still, facing directly toward the camera, toward him. He felt that same pressure in his chest, that same instinct telling him to look away. But he didn't. He kept watching, and then the figure moved. This time it took a step forward. On the camera, he immediately stood up and ran into the corridor. Again, nothing. Empty. completely empty. But something felt different this time. The air felt heavier, the silence felt deeper, like the space wasn't as empty as it looked. He went back to the office, trying to stay calm, trying to convince himself that it was just stress, just his mind playing tricks on him. But when he looked at the monitors again, the figure wasn't at the end of the corridor anymore. It was closer, not by much, but enough to notice. That's when he realized something that made everything worse. It wasn't appearing randomly. It was moving, little by little, every time he saw it. Over the next few nights, it kept getting closer, always on the camera, never in real life. Always disappearing when he checked, but always coming back, closer than before. He stopped doing his rounds. He stayed in the office, watching the screens, barely moving. He started tracking it, counting how many times it appeared, watching how far it moved each time, and the pattern became clear. It only moved when he was looking at it. The more he watched, the closer it got. But if he avoided it, if he didn't look at that camera at all, it stayed where it was. That realization changed everything. He stopped looking at that feed completely, covered that part of the screen, pretended it didn't exist. For a while, it worked. Nothing happened. No flickers, no figure. Everything felt normal again. Until one night, something changed. He was sitting in the office, not looking at that camera, when he heard a sound behind him. A soft movement. Very close. He slowly turned around, and for the first time, he saw it without the camera, not clearly, not fully, but enough. A shape, standing in the corridor outside the office, closer than it had ever been on the screen. He didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. He just stared, and the shape didn't disappear. It didn't glitch. It didn't move. It just stood there, like it didn't need the cameras anymore. That's when he understood. Whatever it was, it wasn't trapped in the screens. It had just been using them, learning, measuring the distance, waiting. After that night, he quit the job, didn't go back, didn't ask questions. But the last thing he said about it is what makes the story stay with you. He said that the cameras never showed where it came from, only where it was. And the last time he checked that footage, before he left for good, there was no figure at the end of the corridor anymore, because it had already reached the office.
So, I came across another story recently, and this one is the kind that doesn't scare you immediately. It feels normal at first, almost boring, like nothing is really happening. But the longer it goes on, the more uncomfortable it becomes, until you realize something is very wrong. It's about a guy who moved into an old apartment building. Not abandoned or creepy in an obvious way, just old. The kind of place with long hallways, dim lighting, and neighbors who mostly keep to themselves. It was cheap, quiet, and exactly what he needed at the time. The first few weeks were completely normal. He settled into a routine, went to work, came home, and didn't really interact with anyone. Occasionally, he would pass someone in the hallway, but it was always the same. A quick glance, maybe a nod, and then they would move on. No conversations, no small talk. At the time, it didn't seem strange. If anything, it felt convenient. After about a month, he started noticing something small. The hallway lights. They would turn off at random moments. Sometimes right as he stepped out of his apartment, sometimes when he was halfway down the corridor. It didn't happen all the time, but often enough to stand out. At first, he assumed it was just faulty wiring. The building was old, so it made sense. But then he noticed a pattern. The lights only went out when he was alone. If there was someone else in the hallway, everything worked perfectly. The lights stayed on, steady, normal. But the moment he was by himself, they would flicker or shut off completely. It was subtle, easy to ignore, but it stayed in the back of his mind. A few days later, he came home late at night. The building was unusually quiet. No footsteps, no doors closing, nothing. As he walked down the hallway, the lights suddenly went out again. This time, everything went completely dark. He stopped in place, waiting. After a few seconds, the lights came back on, like nothing had happened. He tried to laugh it off, unlocked his door, and went inside. But something about it felt different this time, less random. After that, things started to change, slowly at first. He began hearing footsteps in the hallway at night, very soft, almost careful, the kind of steps someone makes when they don't want to be heard. What made it unsettling was the pattern. The footsteps always started far away, at the end of the corridor, and gradually moved closer until they stopped right outside his door, every time. And then there was silence. No knocking, no voices. Just nothing. The first few times he ignored it, but after it kept happening, he started checking. Every time he opened the door, the hallway was empty, completely empty, as if no one had been there at all. It didn't make sense, but he tried to explain it anyway. Maybe neighbors, maybe echoes, maybe something else. At some point, he started staying awake later just to catch it happening. And it always did. Same time, same slow approach, same stop at his door. One night, instead of opening the door, he just stood there on the other side, listening. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. The footsteps reached his door and stopped. Then he heard something new, breathing, very quiet but unmistakably there, right outside. He froze. Every instinct told him not to move. He stood there, staring at the door, listening as carefully as he could. After a few seconds, the breathing stopped. Then the footsteps slowly moved away, fading back into the distance. That night, he barely slept. The next day, everything felt normal again, too normal, like nothing had happened at all. He started paying more attention to the building, to the people, to the details he had ignored before. That's when he noticed something else. No one ever used the stairs. There was a stairwell door at the end of the hallway, but it was always closed. He had never seen anyone open it, never heard it move. Everyone used the elevator, even for short distances. At first, it didn't seem important. But one day, the elevator stopped working. So he had no choice. He walked to the stairwell door and opened it. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the same thing he had felt in the hallway when the lights went out. That heavy, unnatural silence, not just quiet, but something deeper. Like the air itself was still. The stairwell looked normal. Concrete walls, metal railings, nothing unusual, but it didn't feel right. The sound of his own footsteps echoed in a strange way, like the space was bigger than it should be. He started walking down, one floor, then another, then another. After a few minutes, he realized something was wrong. He had gone down more floors than the building actually had. He stopped and looked at the numbers on the walls. They didn't match. They weren't even in order anymore. He felt that same pressure in his chest, that same instinct telling him to leave. So he turned around and started going back up. But something had changed. The stairwell didn't feel empty anymore. He couldn't hear anything specific, but there was this presence. Like someone else was there, just out of sight. He started walking faster, then almost running. Eventually, he reached a door and pushed it open. He expected to be back in his hallway, but instead, he stepped into a different one. Same layout, same design, but not his floor. The lights felt dimmer. The air felt heavier. And the doors looked wrong. They were slightly different, like copies that weren't perfect. He didn't stay there long. He turned back immediately, went into the stairwell again, and kept going until he found his actual floor. When he finally made it back to his apartment, he locked the door and didn't leave for the rest of the night. After that, things got worse. The footsteps in the hallway continued. The breathing came back. But now, it sounded closer. Not just outside the door anymore. Sometimes it felt like it was right on the other side of the wall. Sometimes, even closer than that. He started noticing small changes in his apartment. Objects slightly moved, doors not fully closed the way he left them. Things that were easy to dismiss individually, but impossible to ignore together. It felt like something was slowly getting used to the space, like it was learning. He stopped using the stairs completely. He avoided being in the hallway at night. But it didn't matter anymore, because one night, as he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, he heard it Footsteps. Not in the hallway, inside his apartment, slow, careful, moving from one room to another. He didn't move, didn't even breathe properly. He just lay there, staring into the darkness, listening. The steps got closer, closer, until they stopped right next to his bed, and then silence. He didn't look. He couldn't. He stayed like that for what felt like hours, until eventually the feeling faded and the silence became normal again. After that night, he left. He didn't try to understand it, didn't ask questions, didn't go back. But the last thing he said about that place is what makes the story stay with you. He said that whatever was in that building wasn't just in the hallway, and it wasn't just in the stairs. It was something that waited, something that learned. And once it figured out where you lived, it didn't stay outside forever.